Welcome everyone. I hope you're all doing great and doing well. Without further ado, let's dive into our story. Some killers are strangers who slip in through a window. Others are far more dangerous because you already let them through the door yourself. Hassan Belhaj came home the same way he always did. A modest man with a modest job and a modest, comfortable life. He rang the doorbell out of habit, not because he needed to. No answer. He let himself in. What he found on the other side of that door would never leave him. His wife, Rakida, lying in the entryway, blood at her head, blood at her throat, not moving. He didn't check for a pulse. He didn't think to. He simply ran back out into the street, screaming for anyone to come. By the time investigators arrived, one thing was already painfully clear. Rakida Belhaj was dead, and she had not died alone in that house without warning. 2 glasses, not one, which meant one thing immediately to every officer standing in that room. Whoever did this hadn't broken in. Rakida had opened that door herself, sat someone down, and poured them tea. She had known her killer. The examination confirmed what the scene already suggested. Rakida had been struck on the head and struck again at the throat. Whoever did this had wanted to be certain. And yet the house told a strange story. No broken locks, no shattered windows, no drawers thrown to the floor in a desperate search. If this had been a burglary gone wrong, it was the tittiest one anyone in that room had ever seen. As in almost every case like this, investigators turned first to the husband. Hassan answered every question without hesitation. He'd been at work the entire afternoon, and within hours, his colleagues confirmed it, one after another. He hadn't left the building. Cleared, investigators turned to the street itself. But the street had little to offer. Half the houses nearby stood empty that time of year. No one had seen a stranger arrive. No one had seen anyone leave. One theory took hold for a while, that the killer had come from above, crossing rooftop to rooftop the way local boys sometimes did. Officers searched every flat roof on the block. The one thing Hassan could say for certain was this. His wife had owned gold. Rings, bracelets, a few heirloom pieces she rarely explained in detail, even to him. None of it was ever found in that house again. Weeks became months. Months became years. No fingerprint matched. No confession came. No pawn shop. No jeweler. No informant ever surfaced with a lead worth following. The file on Rakida Belhaj's murder went quiet. Not closed, but cold. And it would stay that way for a very long time. Before any of this, Rakida was simply someone's daughter. Her parents were comfortable and generous, the kind of parents who kept giving even after their daughter married, unable to imagine their girl going without. Like many women in her circle, Rakida took part in an informal savings pool, a small group who each contributed the same amount every month, with the fulsome going to one member on rotation. It ran entirely on trust. No contracts, no signatures, and no protection at all if someone decided, one month, simply not to pay it forward. Rakida loved gold. Everyone who knew her said the same thing. Rings on her fingers, bracelets on her wrists, always. It wasn't hidden away for special occasions. It was simply who she was. Somewhere along the way, in the ordinary rhythm of errands and neighborhood cafes, Rakida made a new friend. a woman named Naima. The two women grew close quickly. Coffee turned into visits. Visits turned into afternoons spent simply talking, the kind of friendship that asks for nothing and gives easily in return. More than once, Rakita pulled out that small wooden box to show her new friend a piece she'd bought, or one passed down through her family. Naima always admired it, always asked, gently, where each piece had come from. No one around Rakita ever thought twice about that friendship. Why would they? Naima never asked for money, never asked for anything at all. She was simply, endlessly interested in her friend's life, and no one stopped to wonder why. Years passed the way years do, quietly and all at once. Hassan raised his children alone, carrying a grief he rarely spoke about out loud. And his daughter, Emaine, grew from the small girl who barely remembered her mother into a young woman who carried her memory carefully, like something fragile. One ordinary week, an invitation arrived. A family they knew was celebrating a new baby. An akika, the traditional celebration held days after a child's birth. It's tradition in gatherings like these to bring a small gift for the newborn, sometimes money, sometimes something the child might keep for years to come. A tiny gold chain is one of the most common choices of all. So father and daughter set out to find one, and ended up, almost by chance, at a small jeweler's shop neither of them had visited in years. The man behind the counter greeted them warmly, the easy charm of someone who had spent his whole life selling gold to strangers and neighbors alike. He recognized Hassan almost immediately, an old customer from years back. He offered his condolences for Rakita, gently, the way people do for a loss they heard about secondhand. Neither of them had any reason to think twice about him. He was simply a familiar face from a life that had moved on without her. While her father spoke with the shopkeeper, Emaine let her eyes wander over the glass display case beside her, the way anyone browsing a jewelry shop naturally would. And that's when something inside it stopped her completely. It was a bracelet, gold, with a particular pattern worked into the band. The kind of design you'd only recognize if you'd seen it 100 times before as a child on someone else's wrist. She remembered it from somewhere buried deep, her mother's wrist, years ago, before everything changed. A piece passed down from her grandmother, meant one day to be passed down to her. She asked to see it. He handed it over without hesitation, the easy confidence of a man who had sold 1,000 pieces of gold and never once been questioned about where they came from. Along the inside of the band, she found it, a small repaired joint, a tiny imperfection she remembered from her mother's own hands fixing it years before. Not proof, not yet, but enough to make her chest tighten. "Where did this one come from?" she asked, keeping her voice as light as she could manage. He answered without missing a beat. He'd had it brought down from the north, he said, commissioned specially, made to order for a client who never came to collect it. It was a smooth answer, rehearsed, almost, though she had no way of knowing yet just how many times he'd had to give it. He offered, casually, to melt down anything old they had lying around and turn it into something new. A generous offer, an ordinary one, in a shop like his. They left with the little gold chain for the baby, exactly as planned. But on the walk home, Emaine couldn't stop turning it over in her mind. And by the time they reached their door, She had made up her own mind about what needed to happen next. It took Emaine most of that evening to convince her father that what she'd felt in that shop was worth taking seriously. A repair joint, a rehearsed answer, a feeling she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't proof, but it was enough for Hassan to reach, for the first time in years, for his late wife's case file. The file on Racket Belhaj's murder hadn't been touched in years. But a cold case isn't a closed one, and it took only a single phone call to bring it back to life. Officers returned to the shop with Emaine at their side, ready to have her point directly to the bracelet in question. But the display case had changed. The bracelet was gone, the exact spot where it had sat now filled with something else entirely. The jeweler had an answer ready for that, too. He'd sold it, he said, to a woman, a regular customer, who had been paying him off slowly, piece by piece, over several visits. Asked for her name. He had none to give. Asked for a receipt, a contract, even a phone number. He had nothing. Just a woman, he insisted, who came in sometimes and paid what she could. It was the kind of answer that sounds reasonable exactly once and falls apart the moment anyone asks a second question. The officers had heard enough vague stories in their careers to recognize one forming in real time. If this man truly had nothing to hide, he wouldn't mind them taking a closer look around. The search began calmly enough. Cabinets, shelves, a small back office cluttered with invoices and old tools. Then one officer's hand found something that didn't quite belong, a seam in the counter's woodwork, slightly too smooth to be original. A hidden drawer built into the counter itself. Inside it, a thick stack of cash, far more than a small shop like this should ever need to keep close at hand. And beneath the cash, wrapped in a small cloth, the bracelet, the very one that had supposedly been sold weeks ago to a woman with no name and no receipt. There was no smooth answer left for this one. His composure, carefully maintained through every question so far, finally broke. He admitted, quietly, that he had never actually sold it. He'd been planning to melt it down, erase it completely, the same way he'd erased so many other pieces before it. But Emaine had recognized it first, and once she had, melting it down would have looked exactly like what it was. Where did this bracelet actually come from? The question hung in the room far longer than it should have. The person who brought me that whole situation, he said slowly, was my sister-in-law. Naima answered her own door with no idea what was coming. She was told only that her name had come up in connection with an old case, and that she needed to come with them. At first, she gave nothing. She didn't recognize the name of the case. Didn't know why she'd been brought in at all. That composure lasted exactly as long as it took her brother-in-law to be led into the same room. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, Naima understood exactly how much he had already told them. "We're not here about a bracelet," the investigator told her quietly. "We're here about your friend, the one who was murdered in her own home." What came out her next wasn't a confession delivered all at once. It came in fragments, pulled loose, piece by piece, each one harder to say than the last. She admitted, finally, what that friendship had really been for. Every visit, every cup of tea, every gentle question about a piece of jewelry, all of it had been building toward one thing: learning exactly what Rakita kept in that small wooden box, and exactly where she kept it. We agreed, she said finally, that we would go in together and take the box, and that he would be the one to deal with her. She never once used the word kill. She didn't have to. They chose the day carefully. A quiet summer afternoon, the kind where entire streets seemed to empty out at once. Children at their grandparents', neighbors resting indoors, the heat keeping everyone off the road. Naima rang the bell alone at first. When Rakita answered, she introduced the man beside her simply as a relative, a small, easy lie in a friendship built entirely out of them. She let them both in without a second thought. Why wouldn't she? This was her friend. She made tea, the same way she always did, and the three of them talked. At some point, Naima stood and moved toward the kitchen, a small, practiced excuse. It was the signal they'd agreed on. What happened in the next few minutes is not something this story needs to describe in detail. It is enough to say that Rakita never stood a chance, and that by the time it was over, the two of them moved through her home with practiced, terrible calm. Naima knew exactly where to look. She led him straight to the hidden compartment, and together they pulled out the box, heavier than either of them expected, filled with years of savings and gold. They left the way they'd arrived, unhurried, unremarkable. Two people simply leaving a friend's house on an ordinary afternoon. No one on that empty street saw a thing. No one ever had. Both of them confessed in full, once the truth had nowhere left to hide. Naima, Rashid Scally, brother-in-law and sister-in-law, bound together by a plan that took a woman's life for a box of gold and savings. Both were sent away for long years behind prison walls, a debt that could never truly repay what had been taken, but a debt they would spend the rest of their lives paying regardless. Hassan never remarried. He raised his children alone, carried a grief that never fully left him, and lived to see his daughter do what an entire investigation once couldn't: recognize the truth sitting quietly in plain sight, inside a glass display case. The bracelet was finally returned to the family it always belonged to, not passed down the way it was always meant to be, but recovered all the same, carrying a story none of them ever expected to tell. This case leaves behind more than just an ending. It leaves a warning worth sitting with. Informal savings circles built on nothing, but trust can collapse without a single law ever stepping in to help. And a friendship that only ever asks about what you own, never about who you are, is not always the friendship it appears to be. And gold, worn openly and without a second thought, does not just catch the light. Sometimes it catches the wrong kind of attention entirely. Rakita Belhaj trusted the wrong person with her friendship and paid for it with everything. But it was her own daughter, years later, who finally gave her the one thing that cold case file never could: the truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next case.